Insulin is what created mass monsters in bodybuilding, not steroids. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today, but if you guys will please click like down below, I would greatly appreciate it. If you are not following or subscribed, please do so and drop me a comment down below just to say hello or to give me your thoughts on the video, and let's get over into the topic. All right, this is always interesting. I laugh about this because I always see on social media, you'll see pictures sometimes with comparisons. It'll be natural versus enhanced. And the guy that lists as natural is very obviously on steroids and growth hormone. And then the other guy on the right has 50 pounds more muscle. So it's a comical situation. And I think it's because people are ignorant regarding, what has happened in bodybuilding. And that's okay. The average person out there who maybe doesn't lift or is new to lifting is not fully aware of the full history of how these different substances got used and into the mainstream and how they're abused in the really, really hardcore bodybuilding world. And again, so you'll see people who oftentimes they'll see some monstrously massive bodybuilder. Like once we entered that mass monster era around 95 and all 1995 and on, so it's been about 25, 30 years since that era came in. Everyone then looks at that and goes, oh yeah, that's steroids, but it's not. That's really not. So what people need to understand, if you're thinking androgen receptor, meaning that's what they're talking about, anabolic steroids, right? You're talking about like Arnold Schwarzenegger, talking Mike Menzer, Frank Zane, right? Go back to that era, right? Remember Pumping Iron and Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those guys were pushing the absolute limits of size from steroids, meaning they were abusing pretty heavy amounts. Okay, and keep in mind, it's not an infinite scale, meaning just because you double it again doesn't mean you're going to get twice as much muscle. Those guys were pretty well pushing the limits of that in terms of, good genetics, training really hard, and then using very, very heavy doses of anabolics, okay? So people need to understand that's about how big they get. So, you start talking about a guy who's, say 6 foot tall, contest lean, 220, 230. That's extremely, extremely heavy anabolic use usually. Okay. That's a big dude. But then, guys are like, these guys are 50 pounds heavier. Some are more. There's some of these guys are like 280 ripped and they're shorter than that. They're like 5'7". And the average pro bodybuilder is about 5'7" on the Olympia stage. They're not 5'9", they're not 5'10". I've met these guys, they're not. Okay, I'm 5'9", and most of them I've met were shorter than me. That should tell you something. No, they're really not. They're not average height. They're usually short today, and they have been for 20-something years. That's the proportions they want. So yes, these guys are packing sometimes 50, 60 pounds more muscle tissue. And a lot of times they're leaner. And they're even getting more shredded sometimes. So it came down to insulin, right? It came down to insulin. And what essentially started being figured out, again, this is like 30 years ago. This is really old at this point. Guys started trying to chase kind of chemical warfare. They're like, okay, this is how big we can get with these things. Can we get bigger? And they're like, we just keep taking more and more, and it's barely making any difference, Add another 30% to their anabolic dose, and they're like, you gained a pound. Pound of muscle over the next year extra, for your next bodybuilding show. So they started looking always for experimenting for new things to add in. People discovered growth hormone, obviously. And what most of them figured, the growth hormone didn't really make them significantly bigger. It just let them get leaner easier, better synergy with the gear. They lost body fat sometimes while trying to gain muscle. So let them eat more. And this is kind of what they notice, it's like, well, it definitely matters. You make it a little fuller, a little rounder. But if anything, it wasn't really stacking the size on. And what some of the medical doctors and people and scientists who were kind of around these circles figured out, they're like, oh, it's because while the growth hormone is in your body, sure, it would elicit an anabolic response and has a synergy with the androgens, but it makes you insulin resistant while it's in your system. And that goes away later. But if it's in your system 16 hours a day, see where we're going? They're like, so any anabolic signaling is being blunted because we can't shuttle glucose into the muscle and amino acids in as easier due to it creating a temporary insulin resistance, but it makes you burn body fat like crazy. Right? So what then did they figure out? Hey, what happens if we just add insulin? Insulin is really anabolic because they started figuring out some of the type 1 diabetics on large amounts of insulin were gaining muscle easier. So this was noticed. This was noticed in even books I saw written 25, 30 years ago. They're like, yeah, these diabetic bodybuilders are gaining muscle really easy. And they start figuring it out. It's like, oh, well, insulin is extremely anabolic to muscle tissue, more so than fat. So what did they figure out? Well, what happens if we're insulin resistant, but we could just add more insulin and it'll force the nutrients in? Being resistant to something, you just add more of it and that'll sort it right out. Not saying always in a good way, not saying there aren't consequences to this, but that's what they did. And what do you think happened? You got Dory and Yates. The guys were coming in bigger. All of a sudden, you had guys, because they were already running over 2 grams of androgens a week, throwing in all that growth hormone, like what happened when they had the insulin. Some of these guys were coming in 20 pounds heavier the next year with no fat gain. Oh man, because here's what happens. Any possible fat gain they would have gained from the insulin gets blunted by that growth hormone. They're not gaining fat at all. But what it ended up doing pushed through the insulin resistance that the growth hormone was creating, just forcing the nutrients in. Well, the end result, these guys started getting really big. And then some guys started figuring out they could get part of the benefits of the growth hormones because of the elevated IGF-1. Let's just pin IGF-1. And that's when you saw guys on budget started getting really big. They're like, testosterone, IGF-1, insulin. That started producing mass monsters for less money. These guys started getting massive. It's also when we started seeing the death toll start going up, the health effects getting worse. Right? Started seeing type 2 diabetes developing out of the bodybuilding world. Because there are consequences to these things. You do this to your body as this sort of a science experiment. There are going to be consequences, and they can be deadly, they can be health threatening. That's what you see. But so when people think of this and they think of these really massive bodybuilders, no, it's not the steroids, guys. It's the insulin, and at this point, like IGF-1 and insulin both. This is what they're utilizing to get that size. It's obviously they're using grams of other anabolics. But guys were way smaller, still using tons of that stuff 50 years ago, okay? It is the insulin that's created these mass monsters. That has been kind of the final key that got them there. And I don't think it's healthy. It's obviously deadly. It's obviously shortening their lives, but it is the explanation.